The expat countries that bit the dust after 2024. We saw it coming. Hello and welcome to our Retire Early lifestyle. We tried to tell our viewers about some of these countries that we're going to talk about today, but people don't want their dream bubble popped, which makes no sense since they're going to do what they're going to do, regardless of what anyone says. But the thing is, we don't want to pop anyone's bubble, but we do want to warn people before they spend their time and money and putting in their heart and soul into something that looks like it could come crashing down soon. If you know your son or daughter is going down the wrong road, wouldn't you want to tell them? These countries have bitten the dust post-2020. Let's start with Mexico. What happened to Mexico? Mexico has gotten too expensive for its britches. We lived throughout Mexico and the last 3 years in Baja, Mexico, and it's too expensive. In 2019, we said Mexico was going to price bubble and pop its lid, and well, here we are. No matter what anyone says about how much cheaper Mexico is, the fact is, most areas of Mexico where Americans want to live are overpriced and over-touristy and overrated. Sure, you can still ramble off the beaten path and find cheap, but those places may not be the most ideal areas for Americans to live. Either they're too crime-ridden or lack good infrastructure and services. Puerto Vallarta is one of those places that lost its natural, idyllic beauty by overbuilding, over-promotion, over-pricing, and over-tourism. And it is just as expensive as the U.S. We know this firsthand. We spent the summer there last year during the off-season, which is normally priced lower. But Puerto Vallarta has changed, and not for the better. Gentrification is happening everywhere in Mexico now. This is a terrible thing because it can pave the way for feelings of resentment by the locals, which is not a good thing for foreigners living there. It can lead to conflict and even violence. The Mexicans are just trying to make a living in their own city. They never expected that their city would become so popular with Americans and that their presence would cause such spikes in prices. Expats and tourists from the U.S. aren't used to negotiating, and they just take the price that is quoted to them by the greedy Mexican landlords, real estate agents, and B&B owners. It's a double-edged sword, because the Mexican landlords and the real estate agents gouge the Americans like crazy. We're not blaming the phenomenon of gentrification just on the Americans. The Americans are just coming in and needing a place to live. We've always said, it's the tourism and real estate industries and the landlords that make the money in these over-promoted countries. The locals lose out big time. What the foreigner does without realizing it is they price compare to back home, and if the rent is cheaper than what they would pay back home, they think they're doing good. So between over-promotion, gentrification, over-tourism, and foreigner gouging and some bitter Mexicans, Mexico is not the same Mexico that it once was. Look what someone just recently posted on our latest video. This is happening everywhere, including Mexico, Africa, Costa Rica, Portugal, all of the places where expats are moving to. I just looked at a video today that was about buying a brand new house in Merida, Mexico, and the house was going for $330K. It wasn't worth that much money. Those houses are put up so fast you wouldn't believe it. The house didn't have anything special about it. The house looked just like all the rest of the houses on the block, and I would never spend that much for a house in Mexico, because just 3 years ago, that house would be nowhere near that amount. Mexico's economy has doubled since the expats from all over the world have moved there. To rent a decent place there now is around $700 and up. Now, unfortunately, Mexico seems as if it has truly bitten the dust. I mean, Mexico has become an overrated country. Will there be an end in sight to these inflated expat prices? Only time will tell what's going to happen with Mexico, but we'll keep our eyes on it. Ecuador. My, how things can change from a once peaceful, beautiful, lush, green country into a crime-ridden, dried-up underworld. In fact, Ecuador has changed so much in the last 14 years, it is almost unbelievable. It went from peaceful and tranquil to chaotic and violent in the twinkle of an eye. Cuenca, Ecuador, where we lived for 8 years, was once a lovely, beautiful city flourishing with greenery and foliage and 3 beautiful rivers running through the city, and it was the only developing country that had fairly clean tap water. Today, the rivers are dry as a bone. This is the Tomabamba River, all dried up. Expats paid big gouging bucks to have a river view, and now it's all dried up. Take a look. Cuenca of yesteryear, you could have a garden without hardly doing a thing but a little weeding. You didn't need a garden hose because it rained 3 times a week. The food was plentiful and cheap. You could throw fruit seeds on the fertile soil and it would grow like mad. No tedious garden work needed. We know this firsthand. We had a food garden when we lived in Cuenca. But something changed with the climate high up in the Andes. It hasn't rained in months. The drought has been devastating to the farmers. The rivers are drying up, the crops are drying up, and the people are getting fed up because the city is turning off the power 14 hours a day now because of the lack of water to run the hydroelectric plant. We have first-hand reports of what is happening in Cuenca because we have a son that lives there. The city turns the power off to the whole of Cuenca now for 14 hours a day, and some of the citizens have had enough. The president of Ecuador is predicting the year-long drought to end by December. Here's what he said recently in the Latin News report. Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa said on October 27th that the country should have largely overcome its year-long energy crisis by December, as new energy plants begin to come online. Will the droughts let up? That remains to be seen. However, the pattern and history show since 2020 that after long droughts come the floods, and that would be devastating for Cuenca since it sits in a basin surrounded by 3 rivers. Absolutely devastating. Let's talk about the crime rates in Ecuador. Homicide rates started going to the moon post-2020 in Ecuador, as Ecuador drug gangs started rivaling with new drug cartel gangs. Mexico and Colombian and Peruvian gangs are also prevalent in Ecuador, which means the country is full of crime. Let's not minimize the level of crime going on in Ecuador, especially along the coast of Ecuador. Many expats and vloggers' favorite place. The criminals are not directly going after the citizens or the tourists, but there is so much crime, it's easy to be a victim in the crosshairs of a violent gang war. Crime gets worse because it is allowed to get worse, and that's what has happened in Ecuador. Take a look at the Ecuador's escalating murder rate since 2013 to 2023. Wow. Crime is hurting tourism in Ecuador a lot, as crime wars are hitting small towns in Ecuador and even the village of Puerto Lopez, Ecuador, where Frank and I spent many a months writing our do-it-yourself Cuenca, Ecuador Coast Landing Guide. Here's what this report says about what's happening in Puerto Lopez, Ecuador.
We're in the town of Puerto Lopez, Ecuador. It's a fishing village with a mix of tourism. The restaurants are very, very, very quiet. It's because of the violence. This was a very peaceful country until a couple years ago, and now the news of the violence has scared the tourists away and really hurt the economy and driven people to the United States.
Cuenca, Ecuador is a city where many expats and travelers would remark about the peaceful, pretty city, and now random street shootings and gang violence show up in the best of neighborhoods. Everyone wants territory. Our son said there was a gang shooting just a few blocks from his home in Cuenca last year, and he lives in a pretty good neighborhood where locals used to walk their dog and take walks to the nearby river Tomabamba or the park with their children. Now you must be extremely careful walking in Cuenca. Sadly, Ecuador has become a country that has bit the dust. Will it get itself back up on the right track, or will it steadily keep deteriorating with violent gangs? Only time will tell. Thailand. Thailand is one of those places on earth that speaks to foreign travelers and tells them what they want to hear. Thailand has many different aspects to it that attract different types of people. But if any country receives the most grievances from people, it's Thailand. The rumblings just go on and on and on. From too expensive to foreigner gouging, to they don't want middle-class Americans anymore, to they only want the wealthy Americans now. Well, Thailand has gotten too expensive for many expats and is one reason they're all leaving. We keep our eyes on what's happening around the world in these expat paradises, and we saw this one coming. It was bound to happen. What happens when you eat too many ding-dongs and potato chips and pop? You get fat. And then what happens if you keep eating them still? You eventually get diseased and sick. That's what's happened to Thailand. Oh my. Thailand's promoters and the Thai Tourism Board did what all the countries do. They first woo in the foreigners with cheap visa incentives, and the foreigners pile in, and after about 5 or so years, over tourism, over expatism, and too overly excited visitors that go there for exoticism, have ruined the whole landscape from top to bottom, and now they're trying to fix everything really fast with their new Thai visas for the wealthier folks. And I think they have a retirement visa also, if you can show $80,000 a year. Bye-bye, Mr. Frugal. Thailand used to be one of the cheapest places to live on the planet. Well, if you want to cut off the flow, why not pick on the lower incomes, right? Some of our own followers are coming out about Thailand, biting the dust as expats leave in droves, as they say. When the expats flee, there's a reason. Portugal. I know what you're thinking. Portugal? Yep, Portugal. You know, a country has bit the dust when it sees the greatest amount of fleeing of expats in the littlest amount of time. We also said 4 years ago that Portugal would price bubble and pop, and well, here we are. Portugal was all geared up for a big bang when they started offering visa incentives and schemes for wooing the wealthy with their 10-year tax-free visa investment program. But it backfired. The last few years when Lisbon and Porto both inflated in price from the investors buying up all the properties and trying to resell to the next incoming foreigners and or turning them into vacation units for incoming foreigners, Portugal has a housing crisis on their hands now, leaving their own citizens without affordable housing. People are saying Portugal, probably Lisbon, is America's second California in Europe. Uh-oh. Did you know this? Lisbon has so many Airbnbs, there are virtually no affordable rentals for the local residents. Many Portuguese have protested, telling the Americans to go home. Well, they said please. Welcome to Portugal, the new expat haven. Californians, please go home. Many Portuguese that worked in Lisbon had to relocate to the outskirts of the city just to make ends meet. The same thing happened to Panama City, Panama. And after so much uproar and protesting from the locals, the government finally had to put an end to the 10-year tax-free investment scheme they had going on. Portugal bit the dust and is now trying to figure out how to fix it. When that ended, the wealthy expats fled and the middle-class Americans fled too when they realized they were enticed to move to Portugal for cheap and better quality of life by the gazillion of videos and articles. You see, if we don't have expectations, we don't become disappointed, as so many expats are when they move to these so-called best places to live in the world. By the way, the Italians will also be facing the exact same thing in the next few years. Mark our words on that. We'll definitely see the gentrification unless the mafia continues to scare the foreigners from dabbling in the real estate market, which is already happening to some degree. They have territory, as the saying goes with bad guys. Okay, and our last country that has bitten the dust that is on our short list today is Colombia. Now, we shared on this channel back in 2019 that Colombia would price bubble and pop, and well, here we are. Colombia is one of those places like Mexico and Portugal where there is local resentment because of the Airbnbs literally popping up everywhere in the city, offering high-priced gringo rentals to the Americans. Some of the locals have to relocate outside of the city because they can't afford to live there anymore. It doesn't take that many upset locals in a community to wreak havoc within that community. Wash, rinse, repeat. Latin Americans have big extended families, and if a foreigner displaces just one family, all the extended family hears about it. And well, if there are 5 displaced Colombian families that have to move, that's hundreds, if not more, family members that now know that Uncle Jose and Aunt Maria had to move from the city where they have worked and lived all their life because they can't afford to live in their own city anymore. It isn't looking good for the foreigners, and perhaps you rent at the local price and you work diligently trying to keep the prices down for the good of all. Do you think the resentful Colombians know that? Other than your immediate circle? No, they don't know that, so to them, you're just like all the rest of the rich gringos pricing them out. Be careful, that's all we have to say. It looks like we have some really bad scamming going on in Medellin. These women are not working alone either. They work for their man, and you are the bait. U.S. urges Americans in Colombia to avoid dating apps after these 8 deaths. Usually, but not always, what comes with price bubbles is crime waves, and Colombia is no exception. Wow, the scams and crimes against the foreigner are frightful in Medellin, Colombia, where most of the expats like to call home away from home. When a country has so much crime against the foreigners, you know it has bit the dust. Better be careful if you move to Colombia. Why are so many tourists getting murdered in Medellin, Colombia? We're sorry to have to tell you these things, but don't you want balanced reporting? Don't you think there is more to moving and living abroad in some of these countries than what you are hearing? Ironically, the countries with the most crime, with the exception of Portugal, are the ones that have been named best country to live in the top 10 by the Rams and Vlogger gang over and over and over again. It's not a coincidence. It's what happens after over-promotion, and now these countries have bit the dust, and really, you couldn't pay us to move to one of these countries that we have listed here today for you. But now you know. That's what we have for you today. Hope you found this video enlightening and informative. Be safe, take care, and bye-bye.